We've got another one to discuss in what's becoming something of a Sunday tradition now. We had another coach firing. This one did not come as any great surprise, of course. It has been rumored for weeks, for months, for well over a year at this point. But Auburn made it official after the Tigers lost by a 10-3 margin at home against Kentucky. Hugh Freeze not returning as head coach this week. Any of the weeks moving forward, they will pay him something north of $15 million in buyout money. Per my understanding from published reports, all of that is guaranteed. So whereas some of the other ones had a little bit of offset language, you take another job, you don't really got to pay all of it out. Hugh Freeze is getting all of that $15 million.
Okay.
So good for him, I guess, at least in that sense, but bad for him from the standpoint of he is out at Auburn. Dan, this is, as I said, been rumored for a while. This isn't a great surprise to people listening right now. But your initial thoughts on this? Auburn now open as well. It's our 9th Power Conference opening, FYI.
Yeah, I mean, look, Hugh Freeze came in as somebody with a reputation for recruiting, for offensive prowess. If you look at the best of Hugh Freeze teams at both Liberty and Ole Miss, you'd say to yourself, all right, the offense at Auburn is going to both find guys, which they did. They found running backs, receivers. The offensive line got shored up. And you would think deliver on, at the very least, interesting, successful, for the most part, offenses. He did not deliver on that. And I don't know if it underscores misevaluating active college quarterbacks like Peyton Thorne and Jackson Arnold and most recently Ashton Daniels. It just did not work ever. They were not able to mount an even average or above average offense in the short time that he was at Auburn. And while the defense undoubtedly improved this season from like a decent place, it's been in a decent place. This year's defense has been legitimately good. The cap on Auburn's ability has been extremely obvious with the turnovers, with the week-to-week stuff, with the idea of Hugh Freeze kind of throwing his players under the bus. That was more so last year than this year, and just inability to finish games. And, you know, if your coach is constantly trying to convince you that they're close, they're probably not, right? That if the breakthrough is something that Auburn has in its system, it would have happened by now. You would have seen that proof of concept. And so the way that they've lost recently and last season, I understand. Like, he's just not winning SEC games. And at a place like Auburn, there's only so much room. Look, we've seen it before with Auburn. Obviously, a different administration with winning a national championship. And just, obviously, Gene Chizik not having long after that. The expectation is competing for high-level SEC success. And I don't know how anybody could make the case that Auburn was heading in that direction under Hugh Freeze. So here we are.
Here we are. I mean, I guess, emphasize something that I know you kind of talked about there. Hugh Freeze's pedigree is as something of a quarterback whisperer.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody who can get the most out of an offense. I think they expected explosive offenses, and what they did in the transfer portal this past offseason was fully intended to get them there, right?
Sure.
But it's possible they backed the wrong horse with Jackson Arnold. They weren't able to ever get that offense humming the way that I think they expected, given the talent that was on hand. And, this is always going to be a bit of a rocky go for Hugh Freeze this season. It was not the easiest schedule for Auburn. It still isn't. But alas, here we are. It's, again, not a great surprise, but crazy that we've got another opening in the SEC and the Power 5, Power 4, I guess now. More on that in just a little bit. We have developed our game. I'll talk through that a little bit later on in this episode. But with all that being said, the very next question is what happens next?
Correct.
Who is the next coach at Auburn? You might be surprised to hear that most of the names that I have seen published, either from our friend Pete Nakos, friend Bruce Feldman, it's a lot of the same names that you've seen come up with other jobs in and around the South. This isn't like a bunch of new names emerging. That's just sort of where we're at.
Right.
Kenny Dillingham is one that Bruce brings up. He was Auburn's offensive coordinator back in 2019. He's still a young guy. I think we all sort of assume he is ASU through and through, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if Auburn made a call. I think you got to make that call. Kenny Dillingham is very much going to be in demand. The one that jumped out to me instantly was John Sumrall, currently at Tulane, has been all over the place. John Sumrall is one of these names where played in the SEC. He's from Alabama. He's only 43. He's had a lot of success as a coach. My hunch is that if he wants to move on from Tulane, this will be a pretty good cycle for him to do that because there are going to be a bunch of openings in that area where he's familiar.
Yep.
So John Sumrall is another name. I did see Ryan Silverfield at Memphis. His name's come up alongside a bunch of other jobs, that are currently open. Alex Golesh is another one that I think is going to draw some real interest. Currently the head coach at USF, was formerly an offensive coordinator up at Tennessee. Alex Golesh is definitely going to get some interest this cycle, as is Charles Huff, another name that Bruce mentions. James Franklin he throws out there. He also throws out Jimbo Fisher, Dan.
Saw that. By the way, Charles Huff in the middle of his very first season at his new job, which, look, not unprecedented, thanks to our good friend Todd Graham, I guess.
Yeah.
But that was even crazier because Pitt is a much bigger job to me than Southern Miss. But yeah, look, the upside with Auburn is obvious, right? You're playing in arguably the biggest conference on the biggest stage with a ton of money, a ton of expectations, a huge ability to land huge classes, both through traditional means in the high school ranks and through the portal. The ceiling is competing for national championships in the last 10, 15 years. And the floor is a mess. An ordinary mess can become a catastrophic one pretty quickly at Auburn, right? That, there are stories about coaches not being interested in Auburn because of the magic word of alignment, that there, have been stories about there being too many cooks in the kitchen behind the scenes at Auburn, unrealistic expectations given, what the roster has been at times. But all the same, they're part of arguably the biggest rivalry in this sport, in a huge state that gets huge support, a frenzied fan base, and the ability to play for the biggest prize in the sport. So you're going to understand why a lot of competitive coaches at smaller places, like the ones you listed, would be intrigued by taking a bite at the Auburn apple.
It is, and I saw an interesting take floating around social media, which is not necessarily something that I think we have come to understand too much here on this show, but there's probably some truth to the fact that relative to other jobs that are currently open in the SEC, those being Florida, Arkansas, and LSU, you could, if you wanted, make the case that in terms of alignment with the administration, with where they're trying to take the football program, and presumably with everybody swimming in the same direction when the new coach gets there, you could make the case that Auburn may actually be the job that has its act together the most out of all of those four.
Well, it's been a weird year for LSU, right? Normally you'd say to yourself, LSU is such a killer job.
Right.
But yes, obviously with the mess behind the scenes at LSU, perhaps it's less so than it normally is. But Auburn's been a place where, Gus Malzahn had a good amount of success. He's run out. Brian Harsin was just not a fit almost from day one. He's run out. Hugh Freeze gets 2.5 years.
No.
Is my math correct? About 2.5 years, 2 2/3 of a year. Hires were so at best. Portaling was in some places terrific, in some places not so terrific. So I'm not sure Auburn right now is a place that a terrific coach can fulfill his potential. But if they nail it, they could be really fun really quickly. But it's a weird year, man, with all of these openings that you'd have to be really into the idea of being the guy that Auburn hasn't been able to find in a long time. And I just think people are going to look at that job and say to themselves, it's interesting. I think I'm going to pass.
No,